There comes a moment when the strongest thing you can do is act like he never existed, not out of spite, but out of self-respect. Because when you stop feeding his ego with your reactions, your emotions, or your attention, his ego breaks long before your heart ever will. When you finally reach that point where your silence becomes louder than anything you could ever say, something powerful shifts inside you. People often misunderstand silence. They think it's a weapon, a tactic, or some sort of game. But the truth is, when it comes from a place of genuine self-respect, silence is simply you stepping out of a story that was no longer worthy of you. It's not revenge. It's not manipulation. It's the moment you stop giving someone the power to dictate your emotions. The moment you stop reacting, you stop feeding their ego. And when that happens, everything changes. A man who took you for granted got used to a certain rhythm, your messages, your effort, your attempts to repair what he kept breaking. That consistency becomes his comfort. Your emotional labor becomes his entitlement. He doesn't question it. He doesn't appreciate it. He just expects it. But the moment you stop explaining yourself, stop chasing clarity, stop trying to save something he didn't care enough to protect, you pull the plug on the very system that kept his ego inflated. And that shift is something he feels far more deeply than the words you could ever throw at him. Your silence isn't about pretending he never mattered. On the contrary, it's recognizing that you mattered too. You mattered in ways you ignored for far too long. You mattered in moments when you prioritized his needs over your own. You mattered when you argued for the relationship, while he argued to escape responsibility. But when you realize that your peace was the price you kept paying to keep him comfortable, that's when silence becomes the only choice that honors your worth. It takes strength to walk away from noise, especially emotional noise, the noise of overthinking, the noise of waiting for a message that never comes, the noise of rehearsing what you wish you'd said, the noise of hoping he'll wake up one day and finally see you clearly. But silence becomes easier when you understand something crucial. Closure doesn't come from him. It comes from you deciding the conversation is over, even if he never had the courage to finish it properly. There's something deeply liberating about reclaiming your emotional energy. You stop checking your phone. You stop waiting for his validation. You stop imagining what he's doing or who he's with. Your focus shifts from him to you, and that's where your power always lived. You start investing in your life again, your growth, your ambitions, your peace. The emotional oxygen you used to give him returns to you, and suddenly you can breathe again in ways that felt impossible before. When he finally realizes you're done responding, done explaining, done caretaking his emotions while he ignored yours, that's when his ego feels the absence. Not because he lost you, he didn't believe he could, but because he lost access to the version of you he never deserved. The version that tried, the version that believed, the version that showed up. That loss hits harder than heartbreak because ego doesn't understand emotions, it only understands access. And your silence cuts off access more effectively than anger ever could. Acting out of self-respect instead of revenge means you're not trying to hurt him. You're simply done hurting yourself. And when you choose peace over reaction, growth over chaos, and dignity over desperation, you don't just reclaim your power. You rise above the very dynamic that was keeping you small. In that rise, you discover something life-changing. You never needed him to validate your worth. You needed space to remember it. Detaching is one of the most misunderstood forms of strength. People assume that when you finally let go, it means you never cared. They assume that cutting emotional ties is cold, harsh, or dramatic, but the truth is the opposite. You detach not because your heart was empty, but because it was overflowing for too long with someone who didn't know how to receive it. You detach because you reached the point where caring for him was costing you too much of yourself. And when that moment arrives, walking away becomes an act of profound self-care, not cruelty. There's a quiet kind of bravery in admitting that your effort is no longer being met. When you love someone, especially someone who feels irreplaceable, your first instinct is to try again. You try harder, you hope they'll wake up, appreciate you, choose you, or finally give you what you've been giving without hesitation. You overextend, you forgive too easily, you carry the emotional weight of two people, while he enjoys the privilege of being carried. And while all of that comes from a place of genuine heart, it slowly teaches you a painful truth. You can't make someone value what they are determined to overlook. So when you finally detach, you're not erasing the love you once felt. You're acknowledging that the love you gave has a limit, your well-being. Detachment is what happens when self-respect steps back into the room and says enough. It's the moment you stop fighting battles you were never meant to fight alone. It's when you look at the relationship without the rose-colored filter and finally see what it was costing you emotionally, mentally, and sometimes even physically. And the beauty of detachment is that it's not loud. It doesn't require a dramatic exit or a final monologue. It's a gradual reclaiming of your emotional independence. You stop responding with urgency. You stop waiting for his message to determine your mood for the day. You stop replaying old memories trying to justify staying. You stop sacrificing your needs for the chance that he might meet them someday. Slowly, you become your own source of calm again. What people don't understand is that detachment is love redirected. Not withdrawn redirected. You're finally pouring into yourself the way you poured into him. The energy that once went to fixing, hoping, waiting, and explaining goes into healing, rebuilding, and remembering who you are outside of him. You begin to see how much of yourself you placed into someone who didn't have the capacity, the maturity, or the willingness to hold what you offered. And instead of blaming yourself, you start understanding that your heart was never the problem, his inability to handle it was. Emotionally, detachment feels like a deep exhale after months of holding your breath. There's relief mixed with sadness, clarity mixed with grief, strength mixed with vulnerability. You can miss him and still choose yourself. You can love what you had and still walk away from what it became. That's not weakness, that's wisdom. The most powerful part is when you realize that detaching isn't losing him, it's finding yourself again. It's remembering that you exist outside his attention, his approval, and his inconsistencies. It's understanding that even though you care deeply, you deserve someone who meets you with the same depth, not someone who only reaches for you when it benefits his ego. And here's the quiet truth that always surfaces later. When you detach, he feels it. He may not show it. His pride might hide it. His ego might deny it. But when the energy shifts, when you stop pouring into him the way you used to, he notices. Not because he valued it when he had it, but because people always feel the difference when something they took for granted stops showing up. In the end, detachment is not the end of your capacity to love. It's the beginning of loving yourself enough to walk away from anything that asks you to shrink, settle, or suffer. A man whose ego drives the relationship depends on one thing more than anything else: your attention. Not your love, not your support, not your presence, your attention. Because ego doesn't feed on connection, it feeds on control. And when he realizes he can affect your mood, pull your emotions, or disrupt your peace with the smallest action or silence, that becomes his power source. He may not do it intentionally, but he gets used to it. Your reactions, whether they're loving, hurt, frustrated, or confused, become the confirmation that he still holds a place in your emotional world. That's why the moment you stop playing into that dynamic, his ego feels the loss before his heart ever will. Men who take you for granted often assume you'll always reach out first. They assume you'll be the one who fixes the argument, sends the follow-up message, or tries to understand why he's pulling away. They rely on the version of you that always cared enough to close the gap. He becomes used to your emotional resilience, almost entitled to it. And without realizing it, he begins to see your empathy as endless, your patience as guaranteed, and your forgiveness as automatic. This is how ego gets fed, not by the moments he shows up, but by the moments you let him off the hook. But when you cut off that supply line, not with anger, not with drama, but with calm indifference, you interrupt the entire system he was operating in. There's nothing more confusing to a man who expected your effort than the moment he gets nothing. Silence isn't what shocks him. It's the shift in energy. The version of you who used to over-explain is suddenly quiet. The woman who used to argue back now doesn't respond. The one who used to ask what's wrong doesn't care to anymore. That shift forces him to confront something he's been avoiding, the realization that his behavior has consequences. Your emotional detachment becomes the mirror he can't avoid. Without your reactions, he's left with himself, his decisions, his inconsistencies, his lack of effort. With no emotional response from you, he has nothing to measure his importance by. That's when his ego starts to feel the emptiness. Not because he truly misses your presence, but because he misses the validation he got from knowing you were affected by him. It's not that he wanted to hurt you, it's that he wanted to matter to you, and your reactions, even the painful ones, made him feel significant. When you stop giving him that sense of significance, he begins to question himself in ways he never did before. He wonders why you're not chasing. He wonders if you've moved on. He wonders if someone else is giving you the effort he didn't. He wonders if he miscalculated your worth. And in those quiet moments of uncertainty, his ego feels something it rarely does: insecurity. The truth is, your attention was the most valuable thing you ever gave him. Not your body, not your time, not even your love. Your attention was what made him feel like he had a place in your life, even when he didn't earn that place. So when you take that away, you're not punishing him, you're protecting yourself. You're refusing to keep feeding a dynamic where his pride thrives while your heart suffers. And ironically, the very moment he feels your distance is often the moment he starts chasing. Not because he suddenly understands your worth, but because he's afraid of losing the part of himself that lived inside your reactions. His ego wants the version of you who once made him feel powerful, but that version no longer exists because you've finally chosen your peace over his validation. In the end, withdrawing your attention is not about winning a game, it's about ending a cycle. It's choosing to no longer pour into someone who only shows up when his ego needs a refill. It's the quiet reclaiming of your emotional power, and the moment he realizes he can no longer influence how you feel, that's when his ego breaks in ways you'll never have to witness. Focusing on what you can control is one of the most grounding, empowering shifts you can make after being hurt or taken for granted. When someone's behavior becomes inconsistent, confusing, or careless, your instinct is often to analyze every detail, trying to understand what you did wrong or what you could have done differently. You replay conversations, examine your tone second, guess your boundaries, and search for hidden meanings behind his actions. But the truth is that most of what you're obsessing over lies entirely outside your control. His choices, his maturity, his effort, his emotional availability, none of that belongs to you. And the moment you stop trying to control the uncontrollable, you reclaim the energy you've been wasting on someone else's chaos. There's something profoundly powerful about shifting your focus inward. When you start paying attention to your own energy instead of his actions, you immediately become less reactive and more intentional. You begin to notice how much emotional stress you were carrying simply because you felt responsible for things that were never yours to fix. You can't force someone to communicate, You can't make them show up consistently. You can't teach them to value you if they don't want to. You can't inspire commitment in someone who enjoys the freedom of keeping you uncertain. The only thing you can truly control is how you respond to the reality they show you. And that response is where your strength lies. When you stop trying to decode mixed signals, you gain clarity. When you stop waiting for him to change, you stop putting your happiness on pause. When you stop arguing for the relationship by yourself, you stop betraying your own needs. Focusing on your own actions doesn't mean you're ignoring the pain he caused. It means you refuse to let it dictate your future. It means you're choosing to heal instead of spiral. It means you're choosing peace over confusion, growth over stagnation, and self-worth over desperation. What you can control is how you show up for yourself. You can control your boundaries, your expectations, your self-care, your healing, and your next chapter. You can control the conversations you choose to engage in and the ones you walk away from. You can control your emotional availability and decide who earns access to it. You can control how much space you give someone in your mind, especially when they haven't earned space in your life. These are the choices that rebuild your confidence and restore your sense of power. When you finally redirect your attention toward what you can influence, you start to see him and the relationship through a clearer lens. You begin to understand that his actions weren't a reflection of your worth, but of his limitations. You recognize that you weren't asking for too much. You were just asking the wrong person. You see that the peace you were chasing was something you had to create within yourself, not something someone else was supposed to deliver to you. And that realization frees you. What's interesting is how often things shift when you stop trying to control the situation. When you withdraw your emotional investment from someone who depended on you to maintain the connection, they suddenly feel the gap. They notice the absence of your effort, your attention, your warmth. But by the time they realize the value of what you offered, you've already begun to rebuild your life in a way that doesn't revolve around their inconsistency. You're no longer waiting for them to show up differently. You're showing up differently for yourself. In the end, focusing on what you can control is the foundation of emotional independence. It's not about pretending you don't care. It's about caring in a way that no longer destroys you. It's the understanding that your power isn't in changing him, but in choosing yourself. And when you refocus your energy on your own growth, your own healing, and your own future, you stop being affected by the storms someone else creates. You become the calm that cannot be shaken. Emotional neutrality is one of the most underrated and misunderstood forms of power. People think power is loud, cutting someone off dramatically, posting about your glow up, or proving how unbothered you are. But real strength isn't theatrical, it's calm, it's steady. It's the moment you can look at a situation that once broke you and feel nothing. Not anger, not longing, not resentment, just neutrality. And that neutrality is exactly what someone who relied on your emotional reactions never expects. When a man knows he can influence your emotions, he feels connected to you, even if the relationship is falling apart. If you argue, he feels important. If you cry, he feels significant. Even your frustration becomes a form of attention. To his ego, any reaction is proof that he still matters in your world. But when you reach the stage of emotional neutrality, you no longer react to the story he's trying to pull you into. You step out of the old dynamic where he had emotional access to you, and without that access, his ego loses its anchor. Neutrality isn't numbness, it's clarity. It's the state you enter when you've processed the hurt instead of projecting it. It's what happens when you stop internalizing his behavior as a reflection of your worth. You no longer take things personally. You no longer create narratives to excuse his actions or to validate your hope. You're not waiting for him to change, apologize, or realize anything. Your peace no longer depends on him. You don't wish him harm, but you also don't place him at the center of your emotional world. That balance, quiet, composed, grounded, is what makes neutrality so powerful. Reaching this level of emotional stability takes time. At first, everything triggers you: the silence, the mixed signals, the memories. You want closure, you want answers, you want understanding. But with every emotional spiral, you begin to see how exhausting it is to stay emotionally available to someone who isn't invested in your well-being. Neutrality grows slowly, like a muscle you build. It's built through boundaries, through self-awareness, through knowing when to walk away, and through choosing peace even when you're tempted to react. The beauty of emotional neutrality is that it shifts the power dynamic without you having to do anything dramatic. You don't block him to make a statement. You simply stop checking. You don't ignore him out of spite. You're just not emotionally invested anymore. You don't try to show him you're over him. You simply are. And that is what shakes someone who expected your reactions to continue forever. When he tries to provoke you with silence, you feel nothing. When he acts distant, it doesn't confuse you, it informs you. When he tries to reconnect, you don't feel the old pull. You evaluate him from a place of self-worth. That's the kind of change that doesn't just affect him. It transforms you. You're no longer at the mercy of someone else's inconsistency. You no longer let your mood swing with his behavior. You've become your own emotional foundation. From his perspective, emotional neutrality is the most disarming response you could ever give. Anger tells him he still has influence. Sadness tells him he still has a place. But neutrality, that tells him he has lost the emotional access he depended on. And for someone whose ego thrives on significance, that realization hits harder than any argument ever could. This stage is where your healing becomes undeniable. You're not pretending to be above him. You've simply outgrown the version of yourself who tolerated less than she deserved. Neutrality is the proof that you've moved beyond him, beyond the dynamic, beyond the chaos. It's the emotional homecoming to yourself. And once you arrive here, there is nothing he can do to break the peace you've built within yourself. There is a certain kind of transformation that doesn't require an announcement, a speech, or a dramatic exit. It happens quietly, internally, and steadily. It's the kind of growth that doesn't need him to witness it for it to matter. When you disappear into your upgrade, you're not running away from him, you're rising into a version of yourself that he never expected you to become without him. And that rise is what breaks his ego long before it ever crosses your mind to look back. Men who take you for granted always assume you'll stay the same. They assume you'll always be available, always be forgiving, always be in the same emotional place where they left you. They rely on the idea that your world will remain centered around them, even after they've stopped showing up the way they once did. When you finally step away from that old version of yourself, the shift is not meant to impress him, it's meant to free you. Your upgrade starts with small choices, waking up and taking care of your mental health, rebuilding your routine, pouring into your goals, saying yes to new opportunities, reconnecting with your passions, your friends, your future. At first, it feels strange because you've been emotionally tied to him for longer than you admit. But slowly, you begin to remember who you were before he drained you. And even more beautifully, you discover who you're becoming because he no longer has the power to drain you. He was just a chapter, stops being a slogan, and becomes a truth you live. The energy you once used to analyze his behavior is redirected into building a life that fills you instead of confuses you. You realize how much emotional space opens up when you stop waiting for someone who wasn't growing with you. You become lighter, clearer, more focused, yourself, self-worth becomes louder than your longing, and something incredible happens during that growth. Your standards rise naturally, not out of bitterness, but because you finally understand what it feels like to be aligned with your own life again. You stop tolerating bare minimum effort. You stop believing inconsistent affection is love. You stop accepting crumbs when you know you're capable of so much more. The woman you're becoming wouldn't survive in the relationship you left, and that's the best proof that leaving was the right choice. From the outside, he may see moments of your upgrade, your confidence, your glow, your peace, but he will never see the full transformation. That's because the real upgrade is internal, and internally is where his ego has no access. He expected you to be stuck. He expected you to be waiting. He expected you to remain emotionally anchored to the past. When he eventually comes to check if he still has a place in your life, he won't recognize the woman who stands there now. The version of you he knew was trying to be chosen. The version you've become chooses herself. And that's the part that breaks his ego the most. Not your silence, not your distance, not your lack of reaction. Your evolution, your ability to move forward without needing him to validate, apologize, or return. Your ability to rebuild without making your healing a performance. Your ability to find joy in places that have nothing to do with him. He thought he was irreplaceable, but you replaced him with your own growth. The truth is, disappearing into your upgrade isn't about proving anything to him. It's about reclaiming everything he didn't appreciate. It's about stepping into the life you deserved all along. It's about realizing that the biggest win after heartbreak is not making him regret losing you. It's becoming the woman who no longer needs him to. And when you get there, when your life feels bigger than the story you once settled for, you understand something powerful. His ego may break, but you will only rise. In the end, you don't heal by proving anything to him. You heal by rising into the version of yourself he was never capable of valuing. When you choose your peace, protect your energy, and walk toward the life you deserve, his ego may break, but you will only get stronger. This isn't about losing him. It's about finally choosing you.